The biting wind was a constant companion, a skeletal whisper that clawed at Alara's exposed skin even through layers of thick wool and hardened leather. He paused, his breath pluming white in the frigid air, and scanned the jagged peaks that tore at the bruised twilight sky. The mountains were a colossal, petrified scream, their crags and valleys swallowed by an eternal gloom that even the blood-red moon, hanging like a weeping eye above the distant, skeletal trees, struggled to penetrate. This was the Shadow Fong Range, a name whispered in hushed tones in taverns miles away, a place where few dared to tread and none ever returned. Alara, however, was not like most men. He hefted the sturdy pickaxe in his gloved hand, its worn handle a familiar comfort against the prickle of dread that had begun to creep up his spine since he'd crossed the ancient, moss-choked border markers. He wasn't looking for glory, or adventure, or even a fight. He was looking for a ghost, a rumor, really, of the legendary sunstone, a mineral said to pulse with the very light of creation, capable of curing any blight. And his sister, Lyra, was dying. Every step was a calculated risk, his heavy boots crunching on scree and frozen earth. The air thinned with the ascent, each breath a struggle, but Alara pushed on, driven by the image of Lyra's fading smile. The tales of these mountains spoke of forgotten horrors, of creatures that hunted in the perpetual night, but Alara had faced his own monsters in the war-torn lowlands, and none had felt as cruel as the slow, inevitable decline of his sister. He passed skeletal remains of ancient trees, their branches twisted into grotesque, supplicating forms, as if pleading with the uncaring sky. The silence here was profound, broken only by the howl of the wind and the rhythmic thump of his own heart, a frantic drumbeat against the desolate grandeur. Then he saw them, flickers of crimson, deep within a shadowed crevice. Not a trick of the blood moon's light, but a vibrant, impossible glow. Curiosity, stronger than caution, pulled him forward. He descended into the ravine, the temperature plummeting further, the air growing heavy with a scent he couldn't quite place. Metallic, earthy, and something else, something ancient and cloying, like dried roses and forgotten blood. The path twisted, narrowed, and then opened into a vast, cavernous expanse. His breath hitched. The cavern was immense, its ceiling lost in shadow, but the floor pulsed with an unearthly radiance. Great, crystalline formations, sharp and jagged like dragon's teeth, erupted from the earth, each one glowing with an intense, internal ruby light. They were everywhere, scattered like forgotten jewels, casting long, dancing shadows that writhed and stretched across the uneven ground. This was not the sunstone, he knew instinctively. These crystals hummed with a darker energy, a vibrant, terrifying beauty that spoke of power both raw and unnatural. Yet, their very presence confirmed that magic, true and potent, existed in this forsaken place. He took a cautious step, then another, the crimson light bathing him, painting his figure in stark relief against the surrounding gloom. His hand tightened on the pickaxe. And then, he saw her. At the far end of the vast cavern, amidst an even denser cluster of the glowing crimson crystals, stood a throne. It was not merely a seat, but a dark monument of power, carved for what looked like obsidian and adorned with grinning skulls and intricate, thorny rose motifs, all rendered in hues of deepest black and crimson. Perched upon it, like a predatory bird on its roost, was a woman. She was impossibly tall, her form regal and terrifying, clad in a gown of midnight velvet that seemed to absorb the light, yet flared out dramatically from the throne's base, resembling the very wings of the colossal bats that hung, motionless and menacing, from the stalactites far above. Her skin was alabaster, contrasting starkly with the raven cascade of her hair, which fell in dark waves around a face of exquisite, predatory beauty. Her lips, a perfect bow, were the color of fresh blood, and her eyes, those were what truly snared Alara. They were twin pools of ancient power, glowing with an internal, amber light that seemed to pierce directly into his soul, devoid of mercy, rich with centuries of forgotten dominion. A crown of sharp, intricate points rested on her brow, each tip mirroring the spires of the throne, and from her back, stretching wide and menacing, were vast, leathery wings, like those of the monstrous bats above, though far grander, far more intimidating. She was the very embodiment of the legends, the forgotten terror, the undisputed ruler of this desolate domain, the Vampire Queen, and her gaze, cold and unwavering, was fixed solely on him. A shiver, colder than the mountain wind, ran through Alara. It wasn't just fear, it was the raw, primal recognition of being utterly outmatched, of stumbling into a nightmare made real. He wasn't just in danger, he was prey. The air in the cavern, already heavy, grew thick, pressing down on him, stealing his breath. He could feel the thrum of her presence, a silent, ancient power that vibrated through the very crystals beneath his feet. He could flee, perhaps, turn and scramble back into the mountain's embrace, but something held him. Perhaps it was the sheer, terrifying majesty of her, or perhaps the desperate hope that such ancient power might somehow, impossibly, hold the key to Lyra's salvation. He stood his ground, pickaxe still gripped tight, a single, defiant figure in a sea of crimson light, facing a legend resurrected. The queen, unmoving, merely watched him, a faint, cruel smile beginning to play on her blood-red lips. The queen's smile was a slow, deliberate movement, a sliver of chilling amusement that made the hairs on the back of Alara's neck stand straight. It was a smile that promised less danger and more inevitability. The sheer weight of her presence, of those ancient, luminous eyes fixed upon him, felt heavier than the mountain itself. He couldn't breathe, not properly, the metallic scent of the cavern now overwhelming. He knew he should run, should turn and scramble back the way he came, forgetting the sunstone and the terrifying beauty of this place. But his legs felt rooted, and the desperate hope for Lyra's cure acted like a dark, binding spell. He squeezed the worn handle of the pickaxe, knuckles white against the dark wood, realizing how pathetically inadequate the tool was against such a being. He was a field mouse, confronting a slumbering dragon. "You reek of desperation, mortal." The queen's voice finally cut through the oppressive silence. It was not a shriek, nor a hiss, but a low, resonant melody, like the distant ringing of a great, forgotten bell. It vibrated in Alara's chest, rattling the fear that was already gripping his heart, and hope, a potent, foolish mix. She did not move, only her lips shifting slightly, but the effect was immediate and overwhelming. The amber light in her eyes intensified, and he felt a cold probe, an unseen, icy pressure against the walls of his mind. He flinched, pulling back mentally, the urge to vomit sudden and sharp. "She sees me. She sees everything. I am Alara," he managed, the sound a ragged croak in the cavern's vastness. He forced himself to lift his chin, ignoring the trembling in his limbs. "I seek the Sunstone. I came to the Shadow Fong for the remedy." His voice gathered a fraction of its normal strength with a mention of his true purpose. He wasn't afraid of dying here. Not really. He was afraid of failing. "My sister is sick. Dying." The queen let out a soft, dry laugh, the sound grating and devoid of humor. It echoed strangely off the crystalline walls. "The Sunstone," she repeated, tasting the word like dust. A slender, impossibly long finger, tipped with a nail like polished obsidian, lifted, gesturing dismissively toward the glowing rubies that littered the floor. "Do you think I, the very heart of the shadow, would allow such a paltry thing to exist in my domain? The Sunstone is the stuff of fairy tales, mortal, a sweet lie peddled by charlatans to give hope to the hopeless." Her gaze sharpened, the intensity of her power pressing him further. "However," she continued, a chilling anticipation entering her tone, "the cause of your hope, your little sister, Lyra, I know of her, Alara of the lowlands. I know the cough that steals her breath, the fever that burns away her days. I know the name of the wasting sickness that plagues your village. It is a curse, Alara, woven by the very nature of this blighted world." Alara stared aghast. How could she know? He had spoken no name, given no details beyond his quest. The icy probe he had felt moments ago now seemed like an undeniable reality. This creature, this terrifying, regal presence, had peered into his memories, into his deepest, most guarded pain, without effort. A knot of rage, raw and protective, flared in his chest, briefly eclipsing the fear. He took a heavy, desperate step forward, the pickaxe swinging slightly in his hand. You have no right to that. What are you? I am Morwen, Queen of the Crimson Court, Mistress of the Shadow Fong, and the reason this mountain range weeps eternal night, she stated, her voice swelling with cold pride, the crimson crystals momentarily flaring in response to her declaration. And I have the right of existence, which grants me access to all truths within my domain. Your plight, Ilera, is a small, flickering wick in a cathedral of darkness, but it amuses me. And better yet, it serves me. She leaned forward slightly, a movement of unsettling grace. The sunstone may be a lie, but the means to cure Lyra is not. It rests within my grasp, mortal, though currently it is bound by the same shackles that restrain me. Ilera's mind raced, a confusing storm of desperation and caution. She offered hope, but her hands were stained with shadow. He knew the risk, the monumental, soul-crushing risk. But Lyra, he saw her face, thin and pale, felt the frantic, shallow beat of her wrist beneath his thumb. He had come too far to balk now. A cure, he asked, the word a plea. What price? What task? Morwen smiled fully this time, a predatory, beautiful unveiling of perfect, pearly fangs just visible beneath her lip. Ah, there is the desperation I cherish. The price is simple, Ilera. You will retrieve for me that which was stolen. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. Centuries ago, I ruled the northern wilds. My people were mighty, not merely the skulking beasts of human fear, but a civilized, powerful empire of the night. We possessed an artifact, the Heartstone of Ethelred, the very core of my power and the source of our eternal life. It was a beautiful thing, pulsing with captured starlight, capable of bending life and death to the wielder's will. It was hidden, guarded by my enemies, petty, fearful men who thought they could snuff out the sun by breaking a lamp. She shifted on the throne, the velvet of her gown rustling like dry leaves. The Heartstone does not merely grant life, Ilera. It is the key to true creation. Its power can mend the ravages of time and sickness. A single shard, once returned to me, would suffice to burn the blight from Lyra's lungs and restore her entirely. But to retrieve it, you must venture beyond the Shadow Fong, into the ruins of the Old Kingdom, to a location now called the Silent Keep, a fortress where my betrayers sealed it away. Ilera felt the cold calculation behind her words. She was trapped, unable to leave the gravitational pull of the Shadow Fong, likely bound by the same ancient magics that shattered her kingdom. She needed a mortal agent, someone expendable. But the Heartstone, not the Sunstone, was the true prize, and it had the power. He swallowed, the air suddenly thick with decision. And if I fail? If you fail, Morwen murmured, her eyes holding a glint of genuine malice. You will join the legions of the damned who guard my halls. And when the sickness finally claims your sister, the emptiness in your soul will be the final, delicious meal I shall savor for all eternity. She raised her hand, and one of the crimson crystals detached itself from the floor, floating gracefully toward Ilera, pulsing with dark, internal light. It was roughly the size of his thumb, sharp and glowing. But you will not fail. Take this, Ilera. It is a fragment of my power, enough to mask you from the lesser creatures who guard the old ways. It will lend you speed and ward you against the deepest cold. Use it wisely, for every moment of its use is a deeper thread binding your soul to mine. Now go, and return with what is mine, and I shall return to you the beating heart of your kin. Ilera's body was heavy with resignation, the choice agonizing yet utterly unavoidable. He reached out, his fingers closing around the cold, unnaturally smooth crystal. The moment he grasped it, a jolt, icy and electric, shot up his arm, settling like a frigid anchor in his chest. It didn't hurt, but it felt profoundly wrong, a magical intrusion that instantly made the mountain air feel less cutting, the silence less deafening. He looked into Morwen's amber eyes one last time, seeing not a queen, but a caged, hungry predator. He nodded, once a solemn oath sealed by fear and love. Turning his back on the throne, he walked away, his pickaxe now feeling not like a tool of survival, but a cruel reminder of the desperate path he had just chosen, leaving the crimson glow behind to descend into the deeper, more complex shadow of the Forgotten Queen's command. His mission had changed, the gold darker, the stakes impossibly higher, and the clock was ticking against Lyra's failing life. The chill that enveloped Alara as he scrambled back through the crystalline chasm was no longer merely the cold of the mountain. It was the chill of Morwen's influence, a foreign, dead sensation that settled deep beneath his breastbone, radiating from the shard he clutched in his left hand. The crimson crystal pulsed faintly, a heartbeat of captured shadow, and with every thrum, his thoughts felt sharper, faster, yet strangely disconnected from the warmth of human decency. He was a creature of singular purpose now, stripped of all extraneous thought save the frantic need to complete his task. Lyra. The Heartstone. Lyra. He repeated the words like a mantra, a desperate attempt to use his sister's name as a shield against the creeping numbness the Queen's magic infused in him. The moral horror of his bargain, allying himself with a forgotten vampire queen, was a heavy cloak he couldn't shrug off, but the image of Lyra's face, pale and fleeting, always won the silent argument. I will do what I must. I will pay the Queen her price, and then I will be free. He followed the Queen's cryptic directions, which were now astonishingly clear in his mind, as if Morwen herself were whispering the map into his subconscious. He found the mouth of the tunnel hidden behind a waterfall of frozen ice that had been invisible moments before. As he approached, the ice fractured, peeling away silently like old skin, revealing a dark, yawning maw carved deep into the mountain's core. The air that rushed out was stale and heavy, smelling of millennia of sealed-off decay and dust. This was the Forbidden Lands, the crumbling remains of the Vampire Queen's old domain, now just a winding grave beneath the Shadow Fawn. He adjusted the pack on his back, took a deep breath of the freezing, metallic air, and stepped inside. The stone passages were narrow and spiraling, slick with moisture that had been frozen and thawed countless times. The crystal in his hand cast a limited, flickering ruby light, just enough to show the intricate, horrifying carvings etched into the walls. Stylized bats, roses with thorny stems that curled around crumbling imperial crests, and figures with long, graceful limbs and terrifyingly sharp features. This wasn't a natural cave. It was an abandoned city, a forgotten realm entombed by cataclysm and time. As he descended, the ambient cold of the mountains retreated, replaced by a humid, unchanging subterranean chill that made his skin prickle with unnatural dread. The silence was absolute, broken only by the drip of water and the scuff of his boots. Yet his newly heightened senses, a side effect of the crystal's power, registered something else. A subtle vibration beneath the floor, a faint, rhythmic clack far ahead, like stones shifting in a landslide. He rounded a bend, the passage widening into a vast, vaulted chamber that might have once been a ceremonial hall. Great stone pillars, shaped like bound, struggling figures, held up a ceiling obscured by black mist. And then the source of the clacking came in a sharp, dreadful focus. Standing scattered across the dust-caked floor were figures, not living, not quite dead, but animated by a dark, persistent magic. They were the skeletal remnants of Morwen's ancient guard, still clad in rusting plates of black and crimson armor, their bones visible beneath the tattered cloth of their ancient uniforms. Their eye sockets were hollow, but a faint, ember-like glow resided within the cavities, focusing with horrifying precision on Alara. Their weapons, swords and axes, green with verdigris, began to drag against the floor as the legion slowly, stiffly, turned toward the unwelcome intrusion. Fear, hot and visceral, threatened to drown Alara, making his heart hammer against his ribs like a trapped bird. But the Queen's crystal offered a cold, ruthless counter. Show no fear. Move with purpose. The thought wasn't his, yet he followed it. He could hear their silent, rustling advance, their hundreds of tiny movements amplified by the crystal's gift. There were too many. A direct confrontation was suicide. He didn't hesitate. Using the enhanced focus granted by the shard, he pinpointed the weakest section of the wall beside him, a crumbling section near a collapsed archway. Dropping his pack, he gripped the pickaxe with both hands. It was the tool of a miner, not a warrior, but he brought it down in a powerful, desperate arc against the ancient stone. Thwack, thwack, crack. The blow was stronger than he should have been capable of, the crystal lending unnatural force to his muscles. Stone crumbled instantly, and he immediately wedged the axe head into the gap, pulling hard. The skeletal legions were faster now, shuffling with unnatural speed. The first rank, rusty swords raised, were only feet away. Alara hauled himself into the gap, just as a sword blade scraped sharply against the stone where his head had been moments before, showering sparks. He dropped down the other side into a small, dark side passage, pulling the rubble to block the opening. The muffled sounds of the skeletal warriors clawing and striking the stone wall he'd just created spurred him on. He didn't look back, adrenaline surging, mixed with the cold, alien energy of the crystal. He was still alive, he realized, still moving forward, but the price of his survival had been immediately paid in the cold, hard currency of dark magic. He was no longer just Alara, the miner. He was Alara, the pawn of a vampire queen, and the only way out was forward, deeper into the forgotten empire where life was just a game of shadows and ancient bones. He ran, the crimson light bobbing, guiding him further from the world he knew, toward the accursed Silent Keep. Alara did not stop running until the frantic scraping of the skeletal guards behind him faded into an echo swallowed by the stone. He leaned against a cold, damp wall, hands braced on his knees, sucking in ragged breaths that tasted of dust and iron. The air here was dead, recycled, and stagnant, yet his lungs worked without the burning effort they usually demanded in high altitudes. It was the crystal, he realized, the vile shard of Morwen's power, working a cold efficiency in his body, suppressing fatigue and sharpening his reflexes to a razor's edge. But with that efficiency came a gnawing emptiness, a sense that the real Alara, the man who worried about his sister's favorite tea and the chipped ceramic mug she used, was being slowly insulated, pushed aside by a driven, ruthless machine. I am becoming her tool. The thought flared, sharp with self-loathing, but instantly, the cold logic of the crystal countered. But you are surviving. And survival is the only path to the cure. The passage he was in finally opened into a sprawling series of sunken ruins, a square that must have once been the heart of Morwen's subterranean city. Pillars lay broken, monolithic statues of vampiric figures with unsettling, graceful proportions were toppled and cracked, and the floor was a chaotic mosaic of shattered marble. In the center, however, one structure remained stubbornly intact, a high, circular structure, like a crypt or a sacred archive. Drawn by the sheer architectural defiance of the ruin, Alara moved toward it, the crimson glow of the shard guiding him. The silence here was different from the mountain's vast emptiness. This was the charged silence of a place that had witnessed unimaginable horror and held its breath ever since. He found the entrance to the archive choked with debris, but the crystal's power lent him the necessary strength to clear a way, grunting with exertion that felt alienly effortless. Inside, the walls were covered floor to ceiling in intricate, preserved murals. Alara raised the crystal, allowing its lurid light to crawl over the ancient artwork, revealing a chilling narrative in vibrant, faded pigments. The murals initially depicted Queen Morwen's reign, scenes of sophisticated, dark-skinned people in flowing robes, practicing powerful blood magic, building towering structures, and commanding respect from the wild things of the night. The art portrayed her not as a monster, but as a divine, benevolent sovereign, her wings a symbol of protection, her laws bringing order to a chaotic world. Alara paused, an unsettling doubt creeping into the space, the crystal usually filled with cold determination. The legends say she was a tyrant, a devourer of souls. But these walls showed a majestic empire, a civilization. He ran his hand over the cold stone, tracing the image of Morwen, seemingly weeping crimson tears as a great wave of fire and ice, the cataclysm, descended upon her city. The next panel showed a terrible siege, not of Morwen attacking, but of armies of pale, fear-ridden human mortals, led by figures in gleaming, solar-patterned armor, assaulting the subterranean city. The murals depicted the destruction of her people, not the destruction by her people. The final, largest mural was the most disturbing. It showed the moment of defeat. Morwen, her face a mask of primal fury and despair, was captured by the armored human soldiers. They were not portrayed as heroes. Their faces were twisted by fanatical hatred, and their sun-emblazoned armor seemed almost blindingly cruel against the deep shadows of the subterranean setting. In the foreground, a figure clad in the brightest gold armor and holding a luminous, crescent-shaped blade, plunged a smaller, glowing object, the Heartstone, into a massive, crystalline stasis seal built into the ground. The queen's wings were shackled, and she looked not like a triumphant villain, but a deposed deity, utterly broken. Alara backed away slowly, his mind reeling. Betrayers. Petty, fearful men. Morwen's words echoed in his ears, suddenly possessing a chilling resonance. He had always believed the stories of the vampire queen as pure evil, a necessary demon to defeat. But what if the cure she offered, and the evil she represented, was merely the viewpoint of the victorious army, the Order of the Dawn Guard, whose fanatical faces now stared down at him from the ancient fresco? What if Morwen was not seeking to reignite a monstrous empire, but simply to restore her people and break the chains placed upon her by zealots? The moral ground beneath Alara's feet fractured. He was no longer just retrieving an artifact for a villain. He might be overturning an ancient injustice. The discovery left him unsettled, replacing the simple terror of the queen with a complex, dangerous confusion. If the Heartstone truly held the power to create and cure, and if the Dawn Guard had sealed it away out of hatred, then his quest was not as dark as he feared, but more righteous. Yet, the coldness of Morwen's crystal still reminded him of her predatory nature. A restored queen might not be a benevolent one. He stuffed the conflicting thoughts down, deep into the recesses of his mind. It doesn't matter who is right. I only serve Lyra. He looked up at the image of the golden-armored betrayer, committing the pattern of the solar emblem to memory, the symbol of his likely enemies, and pushed onward, finding a narrow, hidden archway behind the final mural. His pace quickened, his step firmer, now guided by a conviction that was half hope and half fear of the complex web of ancient politics he was now caught in. The silent keep was closer now, and the truth, hidden for centuries, felt like it was only moments away from being laid bare. The hidden archway led Alara into a labyrinth of service tunnels, smaller, filthier passages that must have been used by the lowest ranks of Morwen's forgotten court. The oppressive history faded slightly here, replaced by the immediate, chilling thread of the present. He moved with the quiet efficiency the crystal demanded, his steps light, his senses extended. He could smell not just the decay of old stone and ancient blood, but the faint, cutting scent of ozone and purified iron, a smell utterly foreign to the queen's domain. It was the scent of the surface of living, disciplined men, and it instantly set his nerves alight. The Dawn Guard. He crept through a narrow aperture that opened onto the edge of a great, circular shaft, the kind used for elevators or grand staircases, now mostly rubble. High above, a pale, almost blinding light filtered down, cutting through the eternal gloom of the mountain's heart. He flattened himself against the cold stone, the crimson crystal in his hand dimming instinctively against the presence of that harsh, pure illumination. The light was the antithesis of Morwen's magic. It felt surgical, clean, and utterly hostile. As his eyes adjusted, he saw the source, a meticulously maintained descent platform, currently resting at the base of the shaft, powered by glowing, intricate mechanisms that hummed with a powerful, harnessed energy. Standing guard around the platform were three figures, unmistakable in their gleaming, sun-emblazoned armor, precisely matching the traitors in the ancient mural. The Dawn Guard. They stood vigilant, their movements economical, their weapons long, gleaming spears tipped with solar sigils, held ready. They were the living legacy of the zealots who had shattered Morwen's empire, and they were the final, crucial obstacle between Alara and the Silent Keep. Their presence confirmed that the ancient war was not over. It was merely frozen, and Alara had stumbled onto the thawing front line. He watched them, his heart a dull, fast rhythm against his ribs. He could not fight three heavily armed, magically protected warriors in open ground. His focus shifted from the guards to the environment. Near the platform, where the light was brightest, the stone floor seemed strangely vibrant, not just illuminated, but actively glowing with a faint, golden dust scattered around the magical mechanisms. He moved his gaze toward it, and a dizzying realization struck him. It wasn't dust. Embedded in the rock, where the Dawn Guard's energy spilled over, were minute, shimmering flecks of gold that caught the light and seemed to radiate warmth. The Sunstone. It was real, after all. Not the colossal, mythical cure he had sought, but small, scattered fragments, perhaps leached from the power of the Heartstone itself, or simply a rare mineral drawn to potent light magic. The Dawn Guard were using it, channeling its purified energy to power their descent into the Silent Keep. The bitter irony twisted his gut. The cure for Lyra lay literally beneath his feet, right under the noses of his enemies, guarded by the very people whose fanaticism had created his current nightmare. He needed to move, to bypass the guards and find the path to the keep, which had to be further down the shaft. He had to be quick, quiet, and decisive. Morwen's crystal responded to his focus, its cold influence urging stealth and ruthlessness. Distract them. He reached into his pack, pulling out a handful of the heavy, jagged scree he picked up outside. The Dawn Guard relied on their armor and their light, assuming nothing dark would approach them. But a mundane interruption might break their focus. Drawing back his arm, Elara focused every ounce of the crystal's unnaturally amplified strength and aim. He hurled one of the largest stones, not at the guards, but high up the shaft, aiming for the mechanism that controlled the descent platform. The stone struck the cabling with a sharp, echoing crunch. The humming mechanism instantly stuttered, failing for a terrifying half-second. The powerful light flickered, and a shower of sparks rained down. The three guards snapped to attention, their spears raising instantly, their perfect formation broken. "Intruder!" One barked, his voice amplified and sharp. Two of them immediately looked up toward the source of the noise, their focus diverted. This was his chance. Elara didn't wait. He launched himself from the cover of the tunnel, sprinting across the rubble-strewn edge of the chamber toward a thick cluster of supporting pillars on the opposite side. The crystal fueled his muscles, allowing him to move with a blur of speed he hadn't known he possessed. He was a dark, fleeting shape against the momentary chaos. The third guard, the captain perhaps, caught the movement with the corner of his eye and let out a roar of warning, beginning to pivot his spear. Elara reached the shadow of the pillars just as the spear point ripped through the space where his back had been a fraction of a second prior, chipping stone. He was sheltered now, but exposed. The element of surprise was gone. The guard were regrouping, their magical light blazing back to full power, and they would sweep the area systematically. He was trapped between the Dawn Guard's relentless search and the depths of the Silent Keep, and the only way forward was to descend the shaft, right into the heart of their operation. Elara pressed himself flat against the cold stone of the pillar, the frantic shouts of the Dawn Guard captain echoing around the cavernous chamber. He could hear the heavy, rhythmic clang of their metal-shod boots as they systematically began to check the hiding places, their illuminated spears casting searing beams of white light that cut through the shadows like hot knives. His own crimson shard pulsed wildly, its cold hum a silent, frantic warning. He had minutes, maybe less, before they reached his position. His only escape was down the shaft, a sheer 100-foot drop to the platform, and then further into the unknown depths. There was no rope, no ladder, and the platform was guarded. He risked a glance around the pillar. The captain was directing his men, his voice booming with authority. "Check the high vents. He's a shadow crawler. He moves fast. Do not let him reach the main lock." Their focus was on the tunnels and crevices surrounding the chamber, assuming a flank attack or a retreat. They hadn't considered the sheer impossibility of an immediate descent. Alara's mind, operating with the cold, ruthless clarity lent by Morwen's magic, seized on a desperate, suicidal idea. He looked at the thick, moss-covered chain that hung vertically down the shaft, a massive, structural link supporting the ancient lift system. He reached into his belt and pulled out a coil of fine, yet incredibly strong, grappling wire, a relic from his mining days, used for securing fragile seams. With his heart hammering against the crystalline chill in his chest, he took 3 perfect, quick wraps of the wire around the pickaxe head. Waiting for the crucial moment when the captain's back was turned and the other 2 guards were sweeping the opposite flank, Elara exploded from behind the pillar. He sprinted for the shaft's edge, not towards the platform, but towards a massive chain. The captain immediately spotted the movement, roaring a challenge as he spun, raising his solar spear. There, the coward runs. Elara didn't slow. He hurled the pickaxe and wire, not throwing it down, but outwards across the yawning vertical space, aiming for the massive chain. The crystal's power guided his throw. The pickaxe flew true, the weighted head spinning, and the grappling wire wrapped itself fiercely around a heavy link with a loud, metallic clang. He didn't wait to check the security. He ran off the edge of the pit and dropped, plummeting instantly into the abyss, his weight supported only by the wire and the sharp friction of the steel loop around the chain. The captain's spear immediately flashed, a beam of solar energy lancing down, missing Alara by inches, searing the air where his head had been. Alara's descent was agonizingly fast, a controlled, painful freefall. He used the wire as a guide, letting the friction burn through the thick leather of his gloves, the pain a secondary concern to the cold, focused fury in his mind. Faster. Lyra needs this. He was a black pendulum swinging down into the light. As he neared the bottom, landing with a jarring, bone-shaking impact onto the descent platform itself, the guards above were already reacting, scrambling to follow or shoot again. He ripped the wire free, ignoring the burning sting in his hands, and immediately ducked beneath the complex scaffolding supporting the platform. The two guards at the bottom were too slow, momentarily stunned by his sudden, impossible appearance. He moved with the deadly speed the crystal provided. The platform was surrounded by a massive, reinforced steel door, the actual entrance to the Silent Keep. Etched into the door, and pulsing with the same pure light as the guards' weapons, was a massive, intricate solar sigil. But next to the sigil, almost hidden in the shadow of the frame, was a small, unsealed gap, a dark tunnel built for maintenance, not grand entrances. The Queen's voice, or perhaps the crystal's ingrained directive, was suddenly loud in his mind. The service routes. Always the service routes. He dove into the narrow maintenance passage just as the captain, having made a desperate jump down the shaft, landed heavily nearby, bellowing with rage. Alara scrambled through the darkness, the passage instantly constricting around him, shutting off the Dawn Guard's blinding light and the immediate sound of their fury. He was inside, the Silent Keep. The air here was utterly dead, dry and cold, carrying the weight of centuries of sealed-off power. He was now separated from the Heartstone by layers of ancient wards, iron, and the relentless pursuit of the Dawn Guard. But he was one crucial step closer to Lyra's cure. His heart, beneath the chilling influence of Morwen's shard, hammered with cold, dark triumph. The maintenance tunnel opened onto a cramped, dusty antechamber. The true difficulty was about to begin. Alara took a single, controlled breath, the scent of stale stone and forgotten history filling his lungs. He was in the heart of the enemy's stronghold, seeking an artifact of unimaginable power. The cramped maintenance tunnel spat Alara out into a small, dark closet, the air instantly colder, drier, and charged with latent magical energy. This was not the humid decay of Morwen's subterranean city. The Silent Keep felt aggressively sterile, a place where life was not merely absent, but actively repelled. He pushed open the flimsy metal door of the closet and stepped into a wide corridor, and instantly, the true nature of his surroundings slammed into him. The keep was a bizarre, jarring fusion. The walls were hewn from the same obsidian as Morwen's throne, still bearing faint, ancient carvings of thorny roses and stylized bats, but overlaid and scarred by countless layers of solar-etched iron plating and powerful, flickering wards. It was a fortress built around an older one, a cage designed to hold power that refused to be contained. The corridor was silent, but everywhere Alara looked, he saw traps and security measures. Runes of brilliant, pale gold light pulsed along the floorboards, clearly designed to detect any disturbance. The Queen's crystal in his hand flared with a deeper crimson, its cold intelligence analyzing the wards. Illumination equals detection. He slipped the shard into a deep pocket of his leather coat, plunging the corridor into sudden, absolute darkness. His eyes, now subtly enhanced by Morwen's magic, adjusted almost instantly, the world resolving into shades of gray and deep shadow, granting him the vision of a creature of the night. He moved low and fast, staying tight against the obsidian wall, relying on the Queen's subtle guidance in his mind to navigate the ancient masonry and avoid the pressure plates he couldn't see. The atmosphere grew thick, the silence no longer peaceful but predatory, like the drawn-out breath before an ambush. He could sense the Heartstone now, not visually, but as a pressure, a vast, stable source of incredible power, humming somewhere deep within the keep's core. It felt like a muted sun, radiating immense potential, both terrifying and wondrous. That is the cure. That is Lyra's life. The thought fortified him against the creeping terror. His progress was abruptly halted by a magnificent, towering archway that led into a deeper hall. The arch was secured not by a door, but by a shimmering curtain of liquid gold light, a powerful energy barrier, visibly pulsating with the solar magic of the Dawnguard. Alara knew instantly that a touch it would mean instant detection, and likely a painful, burning death. As he circled the archway, looking for a bypass, he spotted the chamber's guardian. It was not a man, nor a beast, but an aura construct, a sentinel formed entirely of hardened, polished brass and intricate clockwork mechanisms, standing almost 10 feet tall. It was a recent Dawnguard creation, a magical automaton designed to move with the seamless, silent precision of a knight, but powered by the radiant, anti-shadow light. Its head was a featureless helm, and from its chest pulsed a brilliant, miniature solar sigil, the Heartstone's enemy. The construct stood perfectly still, its metallic eyes unblinking. Yet Alara felt its awareness, a cold, mechanical intelligence that monitored the entire hall. He pressed himself into the deepest shadow of a recess, heart pounding a violent tattoo against the numbing cold of the crystal. He couldn't sneak past. The construct's light seemed to reach into every corner, every dust mote of the chamber. He had to engage it. Pulling the crimson shard out slightly, he allowed its power to flood his senses again. Morwen's strength is shadow, the guardian is light. Find the flaw. The flaw was movement. The construct relied on its sensory input. It saw, it heard, it felt disturbances in the solar wards. Alara saw a precarious stack of heavy, ancient barrels that had been left near a support column about 30 feet away. If he could create a massive, noisy distraction on the other side of the room, he might get a few precious seconds to slip under the archway before the construct reoriented. He gripped his pickaxe, its handle slick with sweat, and let the queen's magic flow into his arm, steadying his aim and focusing his power. He found a small, loose chunk of obsidian rubble and hurled it across the cavernous room, not at the barrels, but at the opposite wall, high up, where the sound would echo and confuse the construct internal sensors. Crash. The sound was sharp, metallic, and loud. The aura construct reacted instantly. Its gleaming body pivoted, its head tilting slightly towards the noise. It raised a massive, gauntlet fist, preparing to sweep the empty wall with a blinding beam of light. This was his chance. Alara burst from the shadows, sprinting toward the stack of barrels. He moved with a supernatural grace, a silent, dark blur across the polished floor. Just as he reached the precarious stack, he slammed his shoulder into the bottom barrel. The tower of wood and iron exploded outwards with a deafening, cascading roar, sending a storm of ancient contents, rotting cloth, fragmented glass, raining down. The aura construct, overwhelmed by the dual noise and the sudden, physical disturbance, stuttered. Its head snapped back, its internal mechanisms whirring with confusion. The moment of hesitation was all Alara needed. He threw himself forward, sliding on his belly across the polished stone. He shot beneath the shimmering golden archway, the heat of the solar energy wards washing over his back, searing his coat and his skin with a terrible intensity. He grit his teeth, forcing himself through the blinding light, relying on the countermagic of Morwen's crystal to deflect the worst of the searing touch. He tumbled onto the floor on the other side, rolling into the shadows of the next hall, gasping for air that felt suddenly too pure, too sharp. Behind him, he heard the dreadful clang as the aura construct finally recovered and marched towards the shattered barrels, its rhythmic, heavy steps filling the air with a relentless, mechanical threat. Alara scrambled to his feet, ignoring the throbbing pain of the superficial burns. He had bypassed the guard, but the sound of his escape would have echoed throughout the keep. The Dawnguard knew he was inside now, deep in their sanctum. The hunt was on, and the Heartstone's power was drawing him forward, relentlessly. Alara did not allow himself the luxury of checking the blistering burn that ran across his back where the solar ward had grazed him. The smell of scorched leather and singed flesh was instantly overpowered by a new, more terrifying sound. The high, urgent clang-clang-clang of an alarm bell echoing through the sealed confines of the silent keep. The mechanized footsteps of the aura construct were already receding, indicating it was repositioning to block a potential exit, but the alarm meant the living guards, the Dawn Guard he had bypassed above, were mobilizing, descending quickly down the shaft he had so precariously navigated. He was a rat trapped in a metallic maze, and the hunters were closing in. He found himself in a long, descending spiral ramp, the air growing colder and the stone walls reverting entirely to the dark obsidian of Morwen's original architecture, untouched by the Dawn Guard's protective plating. Here, the oppression was not of sterile light, but of pure, ancient shadow. The Heartstone was close now. Its power was no longer a distant hum, but a palpable, rhythmic pressure in the air, vibrating against his teeth and making the crimson crystal in his coat pocket throb urgently. It felt like being pressed against a colossal, silent drum. The spiral ended at a massive, circular chamber, a central nexus, likely a crypt or a primary containment area. But the chamber floor was a deadly trap. It was tiled in intricate, alternating panels of matte black obsidian and glossy, reflective gray quartz. As Alara peered over the edge of the ramp, his enhanced vision revealed the truth. The glossy panels were etched with faint, nearly invisible runes that pulsed with residual solar magic. They were light-based proximity sensors, designed to incinerate or trap anything that cast a shadow or touched the light. The Dawn Guard had turned the floor itself into a deadly, geometric puzzle. There was no clear path across. The light tiles covered almost 3/4 of the space, leaving only narrow, winding lines of the dead black obsidian that seemed too thin for a man to traverse. Alara swore under his breath, the sound tight and desperate. The pressure of the Heartstone's presence was almost overwhelming here, a siren call of power promising the end of his journey. Yet this final defense was brilliant in its cruelty. He pulled out the Queen's crystal, its ruby light dancing across the deadly floor. They want to force you into the light. The pure light detects life. He closed his eyes, forcing his mind to quiet the frantic fear, and focused entirely on the Queen's power within him. He did not ask for a physical boon, but for understanding. The cold, alien intellect of the crystal responded, overlaying his sight with a new awareness. He reopened his eyes and looked at the black obsidian tiles. They were not just dark stone. They were composed of a dense, shadow-absorbing material, the original, inert defense of Morwen's court. Shadow is not merely absence of light. It is a shield. A terrifying idea formed, one that felt less like Alara's thought and more like the Queen's cold, dangerous command. He had to become the shadow. The Dawn Guard's pounding boots were growing louder, echoing down the spiral ramp behind him. Time had run out. Alara took the crimson shard and, with a shuddering gasp, pressed it hard against the searing burn on his back. The pain was immediate and excruciating, a cold fire that seemed to spread, not over his skin, but into his very bones, a profound, alien mingling of his essence with Morwen's raw magic. He felt a sudden, dizzying sense of dissociation, a separation from his own body, which now moved with an unnatural, fluid grace. He wasn't walking anymore. He stepped onto the first black obsidian tile. He moved across the deadly floor with an impossible lightness, his feet finding the thinnest, most precarious lines of the dark stone. He didn't merely walk. He flowed, like a dark liquid tracing the patterns of the shadow. His shadow, the very thing the quartz tiles were programmed to react to, seemed to cling to him, dissolving into the black stone the moment he touched it. He was a phantom, his silhouette indistinct, merging with the floor itself. He was barely there. Halfway across the chamber, he risked a look back. 3 Dawn Guard soldiers, their solar armor gleaming and their faces grim with determination, had reached the bottom of the ramp. They stopped dead, unable to comprehend the tiled floor. Then, they saw Alara, a flickering, indistinct figure in the center of the trap, and roared in frustrated fury. One of them, a massive sergeant, foolishly stomped his foot onto a glossy quartz tile. The solar runes instantly activated, and a blast of pure, focused light erupted upward, consuming the sergeant's leg in searing energy. He shrieked, collapsing instantly, his armor smoking, his foot reduced to black ash. The remaining 2 recoiled in horror. Alara used the distraction, accelerating his silent, fluid transit. The Heartstone was right ahead now, contained within a massive, cylindrical vault at the center of the room. He reached the other side, his physical body slamming back into sharp, painful reality the moment he stepped off the last obsidian tile. He yanked the crystal from his back, panting, the cold numbness momentarily giving way to a sickening wave of exhaustion. He had used too much of the Queen's power, and it demanded a toll. But he was here. Before him stood the towering, sealed vault, a monument of obsidian and iron, and from its core radiated the power that would save Lyra. The hunt was over, and the Heartstone was within reach. Alara staggered against the cold, imposing surface of the vault, his breath ragged, the pain from the burns and the magical overloaded dull, insistent ache beneath the pervasive coldness of Morwen's shard. The vault itself was a masterpiece of ancient containment, a colossal cylinder of pure obsidian, seamless and towering, its entire surface covered by the ultimate Dawnguard defense. The massive solar sigil from the murals, carved deep and pulsing with an agonizing, silent intensity of golden light. This was the stasis seal, the cage that had held the Vampire Queen's power captive for centuries. And within it, Alara could finally see the Heartstone, not with his eyes, but with the inner sight granted by the Queen's magic. It hung suspended in the absolute center of the obsidian cylinder, a sphere of impossible light, radiating colors Alara couldn't name. Deep sapphire, shimmering silver, and a core of gentle, ethereal gold. It felt impossibly warm, vibrant, and alive, the antithesis of the cold, dead magic he carried, yet undoubtedly potent enough to cure Lyra and restore Morwen. It was beauty and destructive power, life and death, all bound in one radiant object. A high-pitched, furious shout tore Alara's attention away from the vault. The two surviving Dawnguard soldiers, their faces twisted with rage and fear, had realized they could not cross the solar tiles. But they were not defeated. They had retreated slightly, and now, bracing themselves against the ramp railing, they raised their long, solar-tipped spears. They weren't going to fight him. They were going to sacrifice themselves and destroy the target. By the light of the sun, you shall not free the ancient darkness, the nearest guard screamed, his voice thick with fanatical certainty. A blinding flash erupted from the spear tips. They had overloaded their weapons, channeling all their remaining life and solar power into twin bolts of pure, focused light aimed directly at the obsidian vault. They intended to pierce the outer casing and shatter the Heartstone, condemning Morwen and dooming Alara's mission in a single, desperate, suicidal strike. Alara had only seconds. He knew the obsidian was incredibly dense, but it wasn't invulnerable, especially not of focused solar energy. There was no time to run, no time to hide. His gaze snapped to the solar sigil on the vault surface. He couldn't destroy the Dawnguard seal without releasing the Heartstone, but he couldn't let their blast hit the Heartstone either. The flaw, the weakness. The Queen's cold wisdom flooded his mind. The seal is a lock, not shield. Locks of keys. He realized that the massive solar sigil was not a single ward, but a complex, interlocking pattern, a magical mechanism. And if it was built to seal Morwen's power, it must be vulnerable to her power. Clutching the crimson crystal, Alara threw himself against the vault, pressing the shard against the central junction point of the radiating solar runes. The contact was agonizing. The solar magic of the vault and the shadow magic of the crystal collided in a silent explosion of contradictory forces. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, a terrible, tearing sensation as if his very soul were being pulled in two directions. The purifying, burning light fighting the cold, corrupting shadow. Alara cried out, a guttural sound lost beneath the mounting whine of the approaching solar bolts. He forced the raw energy of the crimson shard into the seal, overriding the Dawnguard's lock with the Queen's key. The solar sigil on the vault's surface shrieked, the golden light flickering erratically, fighting the sudden, hostile intrusion. The ancient wards crumbled first. With a sound like a great, metallic gong, the central junction of the solar sigil cracked, and the entire vault door began to slide inward, revealing the floating Heartstone within. Just as the door began to open, the twin blasts of focused solar energy struck the receding obsidian door. Crockum. The impact was thunderous, showering the chamber in white-hot sparks and debris. The Dawnguard soldiers screamed in agony as the backlash of their own power consumed them, their armor vaporizing as they collapsed onto the tiled floor. Alara, sheltered momentarily by the thick vault door, was thrown back, slamming hard against the wall, the crimson crystals skittering across the floor, uselessly depleted. He didn't wait. Scrambling to his feet, ignoring the throbbing pain of impact, he surged forward. The vault was open, the chamber filled with the silent, majestic light of the Heartstone. It hung before him, radiating hope, life, and unimaginable power. He reached out, his hand trembling, and grasped the radiant sphere. The moment his skin touched the Heartstone, the world dissolved. A wash of incredible warmth, pure and absolute, flowed into Alara, chasing away the cold, corrupting taint of Morwen's crystal. He felt a sudden, profound connection, not to the Dark Queen, but to the very essence of life and starlight the stone contained. He saw Lyra's face, clear and vivid, not pale and sick, but smiling, full of life, perfectly healthy. The cure was real. But the vision was instantly marred by a second, devastating truth. The Heartstone was not simply a cure. It was a locus of power, meant to be wielded by beings of immense magical magnitude. He held a fragment of creation in his hands, and that power came with absolute, terrible knowledge. He suddenly understood Morwen's promise and her terror. The Heartstone could cure, yes, but it could also recreate her empire in a single, devastating breath. He pulled the Heartstone to his chest, the warmth searing away his injuries, but leaving behind a far heavier burden. The moral certainty that giving this power fully to Morwen would unleash a horror upon the world far greater than Lyra's illness. He had the cure, but to use it, he had to face the Queen again and make a decision that would define the fate of the Northern Realms. He was no longer just a desperate miner. He was the temporary custodian of the world's most powerful artifact. With the Heartstone clutched tight, radiating its pure, golden light, Alara turned and began the long, perilous journey back to the surface and the Vampire Queen, knowing his greatest conflict was still to come. The reckoning was inevitable. The ascent from the Silent Keep was a blur of adrenaline, pain, and the overwhelming, radiant warmth of the Heartstone pressed against Alara's chest. The artifact, now free of its solar containment, pulsed with a pure, gentle light that seemed to repel the shadows of the mountain, yet it did nothing to dispel the immense ethical darkness that had fallen over Alara's soul. He moved through the ruined halls and tunnels with an urgency born of both fear of the Queen and the desperate need to resolve his terrible dilemma. The Heartstone's touch had not only healed the burns the Dawnguard wards inflicted, but it had also purged the cold, corrupting taint of Morwen's crystal, which now lay discarded, a useless shard of dead shadow on the floor of the vault. He was his own man again, but carrying the weight of a god. He found a way out of the Silent Keep through a different, heavily grated maintenance shaft that led back into the upper reaches of the Shadowfang Range. The climb was brutal, exhausting, but the Heartstone provided bursts of sustaining energy, ensuring he did not collapse from fatigue. He passed the Skeletal Legion again, now strangely inert and lifeless, perhaps sensing the artifact's pure light. When he finally stumbled out into the frigid mountain air, the moon was high, but the gloom of the Shadowfang had been visibly pushed back, replaced by a subtle, cleansing luminescence that followed him like a loyal star. It took hours to navigate the treacherous peaks back to the crystalline cavern, the distance feeling far longer than the descent. When Alara finally stepped into the vast, red-lit chamber, the sight of Queen Morwen, perched upon her obsidian throne, sent a tremor of primal fear through him. She was waiting, her vast, leathery wings slightly spread in predatory anticipation, her amber eyes burning with an intense hunger that bordered on mania. The crimson crystals around her pulsed and throbbed, reflecting her consuming desire for the power Alara now carried. "You return," Morwen breathed, the sound a ragged, euphoric sigh that echoed off the high ceiling. She did not rise, but she leaned forward, every fiber of her being focused on the object, radiating softly in Alara's arms. "And you have brought it. The Heartstone. I can feel its power, Alara. Pure, undiluted. You are a fool of a mortal, but you are a man of your word. Give it to me, and the cure is yours." Alara stopped 20 feet from the throne, bathed in the conflicting lights, the Queen's aggressive ruby glow and the Heartstone's soft, golden radiance. He held the stone tighter, its warmth a physical barrier against her cold demand. He looked at her, not with fear, but with the painful, newfound wisdom the artifact had granted him. He saw not just the victim of a long-ago injustice, but the powerful, ruthless entity that would gladly sacrifice the world for her own dominion. "I have it, Morwen," Elara said, his voice surprisingly steady, resonant with a conviction born of terrible necessity. "It is everything you said. The key to life. The source of great power. It can cure Lyra instantly." Morwen smiled, a slow, beautiful, terrifying thing. "Then do not delay, mortal. Give your queen her due." She lifted a hand, an unspoken command. Elara did not move. He looked down at the Heartstone, then back at her. "I saw your past, Morwen. I saw the murals. The Dawn Guard sealed this away out of fear and malice. They robbed you. You were wronged. I believe that." He paused, forcing her to listen, letting the power of the Heartstone's truth cut through the shadow. "But I also know what you will do with this power. You will not simply restore your kingdom. You will devour the lowlands. You will plunge the world into an eternal night ruled by fear. The Heartstone is not just a cure. It is the seed of destruction. I made a bargain to save my sister, not to damn my world." Morwen's face contorted, the mask of regal calm shattering into a snarl of ancient fury. Her wings snapped open completely, vast and terrifying, filling the entire alcove, and the surrounding crimson crystals exploded with light. "You dare to judge me, peasant? You, who came groveling for a crumb of power to save your pitiful sister. You have no right to question the return of my sovereignty. Give me the stone, or I will tear the memory of your sister from your mind before I tear the skin from your bones." The sheer force of her rage, a wave of dark, concussive energy, slammed into Elara, but the Heartstone flared, surrounding him in a protective bubble of gentle, vibrant heat. The wave broke harmlessly against it. Morwen looked genuinely astonished, her ancient power momentarily checked by the artifact in the hands of a mere mortal. "I made a promise to save Lyra, and I will keep it," Elara declared, stepping closer, holding the Heartstone high. He focused his will, not on commanding the stone, but on the pure, singular image of his sister's health. "But the Heartstone will never be yours, Morwen. You will never again plunge the world into shadow." He raised the Heartstone above his head, and in a single, devastating moment, he did not use its power to cure, or to fight, or to empower. He used his knowledge, gained from the stone itself, to do the only thing that could save both his sister and the world. He reached deep within the artifact, not for its stored energy, but for the inherent, fundamental command that kept it stable. And he broke it. With a final, desperate roar, Elara did not shatter the stone. He released it. The Heartstone did not explode, but rather dissolved, its majestic golden light flooding the entire cavern in a silent, blinding, overwhelming wave of pure, benevolent energy. It was the starlight of creation, uncaged and uncontrollable. Morwen shrieked, a sound of raw, unimaginable agony and loss. The golden light was her undoing, not by destruction, but by its pure, absolute nature. The energy washed over her, and she convulsed on the throne, her vast wings curling inward, her regal form seeming to shrink, the crimson crystals around her shattering into powerless dust. The release of energy was too potent, too pure, too chaotic to be harnessed by her dark, controlled magic. The wave of light, however, was not only destructive to shadow, it was constructive to life. It swept out of the cavern, up into the mountain, and out into the greater world. Elara felt a final, intense surge of warmth as the chaotic energy washed over him, and a profound, undeniable feeling of certainty settled in his soul. Lyra was cured. The energy had found the blight and erased it, without requiring the queen's intervention. When the light faded, the cavern was utterly silent. The crimson crystals were gone. Morwen still sat upon the obsidian throne, but her power was extinguished. Her wings were gone, retracted and dissolved into the black velvet of her gown. Her skin, once alabaster, was pale and translucent. Her eyes were still amber, but they held only exhaustion and defeat, the millennia of stored power gone, released into the world. She was broken, a captive of the rock, no longer a queen of shadow, but a forgotten creature of tragic history. Alara stood alone in the dark cavern, victorious, yet utterly spent. He had failed the bargain, but succeeded in the quest. The Heartstone was gone, but Lyra was safe. He turned his back on the silent, defeated queen and began his long, quiet walk out of the Shadowfang range, not as a wealthy hero, but as a simple man who had traded his innocence for his sister's life, leaving the mountain and its broken queen to the long, inevitable silence of the world they would no longer torment.